guest is actually one of our own UNT people, and you've probably seen him before. He's come to a lot of our events and Music Now. Marco Buongiorno Nardelli, who's over in the, I never know if it's chemistry or physics, it's kind of a little bit of both. He was a hire that was made with one of the research clusters over there, and you know from our connection with the research clusters with IARTA and David Stout, I mean that's kind of our connection with the research cluster hires that they made. And actually Marco has been interacting a lot with the IARTA, and his work totally fits into the whole mission of IARTA anyway. I met Marco because an old friend of mine was an adjunct here, a visiting lecturer here one year, Mark Scarce. They talked together at the University of North Carolina State, right? And he said, oh, this friend of mine's moving there. I'm so upset you've stolen him from our school. And he's a physicist and a chemist, but he's also a composer and a performer. And you got to meet this guy. So we actually met a couple of years ago when you first got here, and then we've been talking about a lot of how his work intersects a lot of things I'm interested in, but from the other direction, from the sciences direction. And also just how it connects so nicely with what we do in IARTA. And so he had a piece performed on the Spectrum earlier this semester, and he's having an acoustic piece performed tonight. And today he's going to talk about his work. And I'm really looking forward to it because I'm going to hear how he can present his work from the side of the scientist making art with that, because I think that's really fascinating. So please welcome Marco Buongiorno Nardelli.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe, for this opportunity. I told you before, I feel like I'm defending my PhD thesis again here. So what I want to talk about today is this project that I started basically last year that I called Material Sound Music and has a kind of a subtitle, Music Science and Data-Driven Composition. The idea of this project, well, actually what came out at this time of this project is an environment for computer-aided data-driven composition. And it has to do with what Joe was saying, kind of merging what happens in my science life, because I'm a physics professor and I'm a computational physicist and material scientist, and I'll tell you a little bit about this, but I promise there are no equations. That how this kind of connects with my musical life and interest. I've always been a musician before being a physicist. And I see this process in these three steps. The first step is what I call the data reading, encoding, and mapping. And I would be provocative here and say that all music is an encoding of a data stream. Your data stream might be a chromatic scale, but it's still a data stream. And then you are encoding this in some way. You are, this idea, you take your idea of pitch and you transform it into a frequency that you can hear. And then you manipulate that data stream and you make music, you make art. So there is this encoding step, and this is the one that I will talk about more in the terms of what is that I'm encoding, so the science side of the process. Then, once you encode this data, you want to produce sound. And here there are two routes that I take. One that I would say is purely scientific, that deals with the sonification of the data that you can use in order to analyze the data in a way that is not visual. So instead of looking at a plot of points in a graph, you are actually hearing sound. And then instead, the main part, and the one that actually talks with in both ways, is how I manipulate this data and how you make musical composition out of it. So let me just briefly go through the first part that deals with the data themselves. Now, I told you I'm a computational material scientist, basically, and in my group and in my larger collaborations, we develop databases of materials property that one can use for developments of new materials. So if you need the new electronic materials for some function of your iPhone, then you can go in these databases and look for the properties that you need that we have calculated all using theoretical and computational means, and then test it and see if this material is the one that you really want. Now, the idea here of all this data that they are sitting in various servers all over the US, and they are produced as we speak. We have large supercomputers that keep producing this data in order to enlarge the properties and the spectrum of materials that we can describe, is happening right now in many different places. So the idea is, how can I make all this material, this data, more kind of visible to people that are not material scientists? And clearly, the first thing that comes to my mind is, let's make music out of it. Let's use them as the raw materials for either sonification on one side or artistic elaboration on the other. So let me show you a little bit what these data are. And this is going to be very short. Each entry of this database tells you what is the structure of the material that we have calculated. So you have atoms sitting there. You make this millions of times, repeat millions of times this little unit, this cell, and you get your crystalline structure. And this crystalline structure has properties that are encoded visually in plots like this. So you see, I mean, you don't need to know what really is this represented here. It's basically an information about how the electrons in the material behave. So looking at this plot, I can tell if the material can conduct electricity, for instance, or if cannot. But basically what you see is a polyphonic structure. What I see is a polyphonic structure. I have lines that go through a graphical representation. Now the points on the horizontal axis here are kind of representation of a geometrical space, but in my encoding this becomes time. And the vertical axis, those are energies. In my encoding this become MIDI notes, pitches. And there are two kinds of data. You have this polyphonic thing, and then you can do an histogram of these lines and get what you have here on the right that we call the density of state. That is also a representation of the properties of the material. And so this is what is actually in the database, besides many other numbers that I'm not using in this. But what we have are files that have all these numbers in it. And these files are available. They are online. You can download them. You can stream them from our consortium website. And you can use this then to do things that can be beyond the purely scientific or material science applications. And you can use many of this, but I mainly work with these two things that I showed you before, the polyphonic mapping, the polyphonic plot, that is the electronic band structure, and the density of state, the histogram of these bands. So the first step here is to make sense of this data in terms of sound. And so to come up with something that you can use to transform this information into sound, and at the beginning go into this sonification process as an alternative to visualization. And this is done using a set of tools that I have developed that are all based on Python. There is a scripting language that many of you might know or not, but anyways, one of the common things that we use in all kind of computation, that reads the data, these data files from the web, maps the information into MIDI notes, MIDI events, so not on, not off, pitch, velocity, duration, so amplitude of the sound and how long is the sound. And the advantage here of using a scripting language like Python is that these databases are huge. Our database right now has almost 1 million entries. And I want to do this for the sonification and scientific aspect for all the entries. Clearly, you cannot do it by yourself. You have to have something that is automated. And so this kind of procedures allows you to extract all this information in a very fast way. Now, let me digress into this sonification and kind of scientific aspect of this process. Basically, what I want to do is I would like, in principle, to be able to use the sound to distinguish different entries in this million entry database. If I hear something that sounds like another entry, it might mean that those two materials have similar properties. And so that's one of the things that I've been doing, is to develop what I call this unique data sound identifier. It's a sound that uniquely defines the entry of the database. And I'm talking about here materials, but you can do this for any kind of data that you have. You know, astrophysical data, climate data, the bank accounts of the Wells Fargo, whatever. So, in this process, let's go to the sound production part. I developed an app, or at least a series of apps that I call Data Player. It's written in Max and is interfaced with Max for Live, so that I can use Ableton Live for all the soft synths and the managing of the sounds itself. But the core of this is written in Max, that can take the output of this elaboration that one does in Python and automatically produces a sound. And this is the basis for all the pieces that I'll premiere this morning to you, that I've written using this higher order kind of environment for composition. And this is very general, so you can use it for any kind of data file that you have. The only requirement is that it's written in a format that Max can understand, and is basically a space-separated columns in a text file. So, the data sound identifier. As I said before, I want to develop a sonification that allows me to distinguish between different entries in the same database. And what I'm using to define this identifier is the histogram I was telling you about, this density of state information. And I'm showing here the way in which I'm mapping the information into, the 88 keys of a piano. And what I'm doing is I'm mapping the energies, the range of energies of this data into the MIDI notes. And I'm associated to each MIDI note a velocity, so an amplitude, that is proportional to the density of state. And I'm showing here this mapping for 4 different elements: silicon, germanium, carbon, and tin. Carbon here is actually diamond, in the diamond structure. And these are very similar elements. If you look at the periodic table, they all sit in the same column, one next to each other. And if you look at the data, I mean this density of state things, they don't look very different, but you'll hear it that they are different. This is silicon, germanium, diamond, tin. I mean, there are some of them, they have the same kind of peaks and valleys, but you hear it that they are different. And so I actually had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with the chief research scientist at Pandora, that you probably know, because they develop algorithms for this user recommendation system that is based on what you hear. And so if you like that, then you might like this. And I was discussing with him the idea that you can use this kind of algorithm to search in the database, because you hear something that sounds like the material that you really need, and then you look for all the million entries for a sound that is similar. And so it becomes what we call in computational sciences, we call it data mining. You go and mine for the data that you are looking for. Okay, so that was for the density of state. Now let's go to the polyphonic mapping. Fortunately, it's not very clear. Maybe, can we switch off a little bit of the lights over there? Anyway, that's the same, the encoding is done in a very similar way. Energies are mapped into MIDI note from 21 to 108, so the 88 keys of the piano. The amplitude for each note comes from the histogram, from the density of state data. And then the duration of each MIDI event, because now you want to make kind of a music out of it. The duration of each MIDI event is inferred by the variation of this data. The more they vary, the more a note might last, for instance. So you can map the opposite. The more they vary, the more the notes are faster. And this is, that is where things start to be a little bit blurry of what is the data really telling you and what you are really doing with the data. But as I will discuss a little bit more later, it all has to do with the consistency in which you do your encoding. If you are consistent, then any choice is a good choice. But then if you make a choice, you have to keep it for all of them. So we do this polyphonic mapping. And now we get to the third part of this process, that is the data manipulation for the musical composition. Again, here you have streams of data. Each of these lines here, it's a melody, if you want, or it's a unit in pitch. So it's kind of an extension of a set, if you want. Or a 12-tone draw. That is not 12, because now here you have as many data you want, but you can treat this conceptually in the same way as you would treat a set or a 12-tone draw. And in fact, this is my score. I actually use Excel or any other data manipulation tool. I can use typical Unix scripting languages like Awk, Sed, Python, Java. But the point is that all these are columns with numbers. Each of these three columns here, you don't see it very well, but you have the note, the velocity, and the duration. And then you can, that's the data that you have here. And then you can take this and start to move it around, start to compose with this in a way you would do in Finale using the contrapuntal tools. You do the reverse, you invert the set, you can do whatever you want. But you do it on a set of numbers here. Then you put everything together and you end up with a composition. And so the first example that I want you to listen to is based on the sonification and remix of the data from three materials: diamond, zinc oxide, and gold. Diamond, you know what it is, you know what is gold. Zinc oxide is a material that is used in electronics and in optoelectronics, mostly in solar cells and these kind of things. So I took this data and I made a piece out of this. And the piece is called Music for 88 Keys, and is for player, piano. That's why the Bosendorfer is here in the center, and electronics. The piece is dedicated to Conlon Nancaro in memoriam. Conlon Nancaro, for those of you who don't know, was actually a Texas composer who used the player piano extensively in all his career. So it was kind of a pioneer in the use of the player piano. composition and the program notes that you get. So, okay, so this is this was a first composition. But what I'm gonna do here is, I think I'm stealing one of your questions. Is where does composition start? And I think that composition starts actually from the very beginning, in the act of choosing as a composer your mapping. And I have an example here that, that shows how the artistic choice that you make is not actually something that goes against, say, the scientific choice that you can make for the sonification process. And I'm coming back to what I was saying before, provided you are consistent. So I took the data for silicon, another material that is everywhere, and I'm mapping this data using these 4 different scales: a chromatic scale, a diatonic scale, a diminished, and a pentatonic. Of course, the result is different. I have only, probably the data that I'm playing go from here to maybe where it says 50, like this first peak in the upper curve. It's very short, it's like just the beginning of it. But you hear that clearly the musical feeling is different, but the information that you get once you start learning how to listen is the same information. Some Chinese, traditional instrument, that might might be an interesting piece. So you see that first of all, the structure that you are mapping of the data into the sound is the same structure. You see, they go up and down, and you can follow the lines if you could see them a little better. But the artistic result, if you wish, is completely different, or at least that you can hear that is a different thing. Now, clearly, if you want to use this for scientific recognition of data, you have to choose your mapping and keep it. So if you choose the pentatonic, fine, but you keep the pentatonic for 1 million entries of the database, and then it's what you give you. We will give you, the kind of the objectivity in a way of identification of the entries. Of course, as a composer, you can mix and match whatever you want. And so these are the ideas that come into the composition. That is, I want to manipulate the data. I can do that by any 12-tone operation that I can extend to this data stream. I can transpose, invert, do retrograde, multiply. I can section the data. I can do something on one piece and something different on another. I can do looping. I can do, a lot of things that you do when you write your kind of, I don't know, the rap arrangements. You can take the same thing and play it over and over. And what are my data manipulation tools? Are spreadsheets, Excel, numbers, Max. Max has actually very interesting database manipulation aspect that one can use for live manipulation of the data, or scripting. But where this comes, becomes very interesting is where in the piece that you just heard in the suite, in the Music for 88 Keys, the material is pre-composed. So I sat there and worked on my composition as I wanted to sound. What I can do is I can actually do something where I manipulate the sound as the sound, the data are streaming. And so that makes for a live performance of the data stream that can be very well integrated with live performers. And so you can add other instruments to your performance and play your data streams as one of the instruments. And so this is what actually is the second piece that I'm going to play for you guys. That is the first invention for data streams, and this is the score of it. So on top you have the data, the actual data that I'm playing. That is the same data for silicon, but now the mapping is the 12-tone roll of Webern's string quartet number 28. So in a way, this is not linear. It's not a chromatic scale that goes either always up or down. This one has some structure in it. So it makes for the initial choice something that is a little bit more interesting in a set of data that by themselves would be very linear. So that's where the process starts. And this is the score, the one on the bottom. Each voice here is one of the data player entries. So it's one set of data that comes into the software. And these are all events from 0 to 34, where the data is manipulated live. So no performance will be ever the same unless the performer will strike the right button at the same time. That is very difficult. So you leave the data to play themselves a little bit. And that's actually very exciting, because sometimes there are structures that are hidden into the data that you are playing that you don't know because you have never tried it. And so as a composer, you have to learn how, it's more like an improvisation. You have to learn how to play with others, and these others are not other instrumentalists or players, are these data streams. And so now, so that's the patch for that has all the events. So each of this button on the right corresponds to a particular event in this score, and you can go around as you wish. And each event is described in the score itself. That if you want to see it better, it's here. I have my copy here. I might need to do something technical here. I don't know if it will play just right without doing anything. Bear with me. Okay, yeah, I have to load this. That's not part of the composition. I still have to figure out how to arrange this differently so that I don't have to do this all the time, but this one concludes a little bit this presentation with this idea that I have of having a space for the performance of this data that actually fits what you should feel if you were inside silicon. And you can mix with different sound installation. I think this one that will play now is something that I wrote not with using Max but with Super Collider that has a kind of a different way of approaching the data stream. But you can imagine that you can walk around the structure and you hear the sound of the atoms while you move in the space. With this, I will conclude the presentation. I have to thank a lot of people who are here or who are not here, in particular Joe and John Nelson, Panayotis, Kokoras, David Stout, Andrew, and all the SEMI staff that have been tremendous. I bugged them for weeks in order to get this working, and we got it to work. So thank you very much, guys. It's been excellent. And various people at Silent74 for Max, Scott, Gresham, Lancaster here, and the people at UT Dallas. With Scott, we actually recorded the first piece, the Music for 88 Keys, and is available on the website. And of course, I want to acknowledge my friends and colleagues of the science part, and in particular Stefano Curtarolo, Marco Fornari, and Enrico Calzolari. And invite you to visit the website, materialsoundmusic.com, where you will find this music, some of it, and more information about the project. Thank you very much.